So the first thing that we're going to be learning is how to draw our mannequin and just getting general proportions. We're going to need to know this skill in order to complete the top half of that worksheet that says the gesture drawing, okay, because we're going to be doing a gesture drawing of our mannequins. So let's just get into talking about proportions. You're going to set up your mannequin, so it's just straight up and down. And the first thing that we're going to draw is actually the head. So right up here, kind of near the top of my paper, okay, when I'm looking at my mannequin, okay, I am just drawing that basic shape of the head. So it's flat on the bottom and kind of curvy on top. This is just in your sketchbook, open to a fresh page. Okay. And then the next thing that I see is I see a little neck joint. Okay, so it's curvy. It's almost like a little circle in there. Okay, so I'm drawing that in there. And we're going to talk about the height of this mannequin in sections of head height. Okay, so we're going to use our head almost as a measurement to go down the body of our mannequin. So if I call this like section number 1, okay, I'm going to try and repeat this. Your mannequin is about roughly 6.5 to 7 head height tall. It just depends. Everyone's a little bit different, right? So I'm going to give you just an average. So now when I look at the body, okay, the shoulders actually go out away from the head here. Okay, and then that spot on the chest where it actually goes out and then it comes back in, that kind of line or that U that you see there, that's going to represent the next space for the next size of the head. So I'm just going to draw in kind of that tummy section. And again, that's going to represent number 2, or the second section of the head. Okay, then we have the base or the bottom part of the tummy, okay, which is going to come down here. And it's really kind of just like a squished rectangle, okay, if we look at that general anatomy, right? Then we have the abdomen, okay? And that is just a little bit smaller, but this represents now our third section of our head. Okay, so kind of from the middle of the chest down to the lower abdomen represents that third head section. Okay. Our next head section is going to be the hips, which are the same width as the shoulders. Okay, so it's kind of almost like an upside down. It gets a little wider at the bottom. Okay. And it also incorporates, okay, the beginning socket of the thighs. Okay, so that's kind of just like if we could imagine circles, like if I could see through that wood, it would look like that. Okay, but I'm only drawing kind of a half circle to represent that hip joint. Okay, there's only a little gap between the legs, so make sure you make those hip joints large enough. Okay, this is section number 4. Okay, you guys can tell my sections are somewhat similar. They're a little bit different. It's okay if they're a little bit off, but this is kind of the general rule, right? Okay, the next head section is going to be your femur. So when we draw femurs, okay, I want you to think that they get a little bit skinnier towards your kneecap, okay, but really what they are is they're cylinders. So they're rounded kind of on the bottom, rounded on the top, okay, and then they're 2 parallel lines. Okay, so rounded at the kneecap, rounded at the bottom, it's a cylinder. Okay, it gets a little bit smaller at the kneecap, and it's a little bit wider up by your thigh. Okay, 2 cylinders. I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit so you guys can see a little bit better. Okay, that's your next section. Okay. Some people kind of argue that the kneecaps are in there too. This is where we kind of get that awkward half in here. So I'm going to include the kneecaps in the 6th section. So you have a kneecap, which is basically just a circle there. Okay. And then you have your shins, which are basically, okay, just more cylinders, okay? And make sure you don't make your shins too small. That's another head width. Okay. Sometimes when we draw like anime, we make our legs really long and we make our arms really long, or we make them really short and we make our head really large. So we want to try and get that accurate proportion here. So this is kind of our 6th section. And actually the 6th section goes to about halfway to the shin. Okay, this is why it gets a little weird. Okay, this is more like number 6, goes halfway to the shin. And then you have your ankle bone, okay, which is just another little socket. Okay, and then for the feet, okay, the feet are coming directly out at us. So what we're going to draw is just a U to represent what's called foreshortening. Okay, that's coming out at us. And then you're just gonna draw a little straight line, horizontal line for the back panel. Okay, so a U to represent that it's coming out at us. Okay, and then that back panel which represents the foot. Okay, this represents the final 7th head. Okay, or 6.5, depending on, you know, how the length of the legs or the length of the torso, right? Okay, so now let's talk about arms. Okay, so when I do arms, I'm going to stand up here so you guys can see. For head width wide, your shoulder, if I could detach my head here, right, I could move it off to the side and I'd have one head width off to my left and one head width to my right. So your shoulders are actually the size of a head width. So if you kind of map it out here, like you don't necessarily have to draw this, but that's how big I've decided my head's going to be. Right? So I'm going to kind of go over my lines here a little bit. That means my shoulders, or that shoulder socket, needs to come off in that oval pattern so that it's wide enough. Okay? So draw your shoulders in. Now when we also look at our elbows, you can do this too. My elbows go all the way down to my waist. Again, it depends. Some of you have long arms, some of you have short arms. So right at my waist is where I'm going to put my elbow joint, okay, which is right about in here. Okay, I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, because your elbow joint is a little bit smaller. And then we're just drawing in those cylinders again. So it should kind of connect. Don't make your cylinder too small right here at the elbow joint. I always kind of giggle when I see that with students. And they have these like little baby arms, and then they get really beefy on the forearms. So keep them kind of thick. Okay. And then we have our wrist joint, which is our next one. And I notice when I put my arm down, my wrist joint is kind of right in line with my hip. Okay, so right next to my hip, that's where I'm going to put my wrist joint, which is just another little circle. Okay, and again, it's connected by a cylinder, okay, that represents the forearm. Okay, so you can start kind of changing the direction of the cylinder if you need to. So I'm curving my lines up here. Okay, makes it look more like the forearm. And then the last one, if we look at those hands, they're kind of like paddle hands, but let's decide, okay, my fingers, for me, okay, I have average size hands, okay, they go down to about my mid-thigh. Again, some of you have long fingers, it goes closer to your knee. Some of you have short arms, so it's closer up by your hip. But for me, it's right in the mid-thigh. So when we go to do our paddle hands, okay, you can kind of tick mark, you know, where you're going to. But then you're just drawing a little paddle hand to represent that. If you want to do it sideways, okay, you can. It kind of just looks like this then for your hands. Okay. Again, this is just a very rough guideline to show you where your joints and your ligaments, okay, where your forearms, your arm lengths are at, and your leg lengths go. Okay. Now we're going to move on to our worksheet. So let's flip gears and go to that.